The silence in the penthouse suite of the Grand Majestic Hotel was not a peaceful one. It was a dense, suffocating blanket woven from unsaid words and profound miscalculation. On one side of the vast marble coffee table sat Mr. Tanaka, a man whose quiet presence seemed to absorb all the light in the room. He was a titan of industry, a potential investor whose partnership could redefine the hotel's legacy, and he was dressed in a traditional dark blue kimono of such exquisite silk it seemed to drink the afternoon sun. On the other side, sweating in a tailored suit that suddenly felt 2 sizes too small, was Mr. Harrison, the hotel's general manager. Flanking him were a nervous junior executive and a butler who had perfected the art of appearing inanimate. And in the corner, polishing a silver tray that was already gleaming, was Lena. At 23, she was a ghost in a gray uniform and a starched white apron, a piece of functional decor meant to be overlooked. Her presence was an assumption, her purpose to erase any sign of imperfection before it was ever noticed. For the past hour, Mr. Harrison had been performing a one-man show of corporate pleasantries, but the real conversation had yet to begin. The professional translator he had booked was, according to a frantic text message, trapped in a freeway shutdown. Harrison, ever the picture of control, had assured everyone it was a minor hiccup. And then Mr. Tanaka spoke. It was not a simple greeting. It was a long, elegant, and impossibly complex stream of Japanese, flowing with the smooth, intricate patterns of a silk scroll unfurling. The sentence, or perhaps paragraph, ended, and the silence that followed was absolute. Mr. Harrison's smile was frozen on his face, a rictus of dawning horror. He had understood nothing, not a single word. His eyes darted around the room, looking for a lifeline that wasn't there. He saw the impassive face of Mr. Tanaka's assistant, the wide, panicked eyes of his junior executive, and then his gaze fell upon Lena. She had stopped polishing, her hands still, her attention caught by the sudden shift in the room's energy. Harrison's mind, racing for a scapegoat, for any action that might feign control, fixed on her. She was an imperfection. Her lingering presence was a stain on this tableau of high finance. He made a sharp, dismissive gesture with his hand, a flick of the wrist that was more insulting than any word. "You can go now," he said, his voice tight with restrained panic. "We're finished with the service." He didn't look at her, his focus already back on the silent millionaire, as if shooing away a fly. Lena felt the casual sting of the dismissal, a familiar ache of being rendered invisible. But she didn't move just yet. She watched the manager, a man who saw her only as a pair of hands, begin to crumble. The manager's composure, a carefully constructed facade of European tailoring and feigned worldliness, was disintegrating with terrifying speed. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the tense quiet. He leaned forward, adopting a tone of excruciating slowness and volume, as if Mr. Tanaka were not a sophisticated global investor but a confused tourist who had wandered into the wrong room. "Welcome," he articulated, stretching the word into 3 painful syllables. "We are so honored to have you." He accompanied this with a series of vague, sweeping hand gestures that were meant to convey grandeur, but only signaled desperation. Mr. Tanaka's expression remained a placid mask, but the corner of his assistant's mouth tightened in what could only be described as contempt. The junior executive, a young man named David, looked physically ill, his face pale and clammy. The deal hanging in the balance was colossal, a multi-million-dollar venture that would elevate the Grand Majestic from a mere luxury destination into a global icon. Harrison's career, his entire professional identity, was tethered to this moment. This was his legacy. And it was slipping through his fingers like fine sand. The air grew thick with the metallic scent of failure. Harrison, now visibly sweating, turned his frustration on the nearest target. He shot a venomous glare at David. "I thought you confirmed the translator. This is your fault. You were supposed to have a contingency," David stammered. "Sir, there was a multi-car pileup on the interstate. No one is getting through." Harrison wasn't listening. His frantic eyes scanned the room again and landed, with renewed irritation, on Lena. She had moved toward the ornate double doors of the suite but had paused, her hand hovering just above the handle, an involuntary witness to the slow-motion catastrophe. Her stillness seemed to mock his frantic energy. "What are you still doing here?" he snapped, his voice cracking under the strain. The public nature of the rebuke made it sharper, crueler. "I told you to get out. We are dealing with important business." The words hung in the air, drawing a thick, brutal line between the people who mattered and the person who did not. The butler flinched. David looked at the floor. Lena's face remained impassive, but inside, a quiet, simmering heat began to build. She had been dismissed, ignored, and now publicly shamed, all while the man responsible for the crisis projected his own incompetence onto everyone around him. She absorbed the humiliation, another layer added to the invisible armor she wore with her uniform each day. The gray uniform was a costume, a role she played for 10 hours a day, but it was not her. The real Lena existed in a world far removed from polishing silver and fetching towels, a world that unfolded late at night in her small apartment, illuminated by the glow of a single desk lamp. There, she was not a maid, but a scholar. Her tiny living room was a fortress of books, with towers of well-worn paperbacks and imposing academic texts on syntax, phonology, and the intricate art of translation. Pinned to a corkboard above her desk were charts of kanji characters, notes on grammatical structures, and a faded photograph of a smiling, elderly woman. This was Professor Albright, her university mentor, the one who had first recognized her gift. "You don't just learn a language, Lena," the professor had told her, her voice warm over a cup of tea in her cluttered office. "You inhabit it. You have an ear for the music behind the words, a nuance that can't be taught from a textbook." Lena had graduated summa cum laude with a degree in linguistics, her thesis on the evolution of honorifics in contemporary Japanese business discourse earning her the department's highest honors. She had a mind perfectly tuned to the delicate dance of cross-cultural communication. But a brilliant mind and a prestigious degree were no match for a saturated job market and a mountain of student loans. The position at the Grand Majestic was supposed to be a temporary stopgap, a way to pay the bills while she applied for fellowships and translation work. But months had bled into a year, and the temporary had begun to feel terrifyingly permanent. The daily routine was a slow erosion of her spirit. She moved through the opulent halls of the hotel like a phantom, her presence acknowledged only when something was needed. Guests looked past her. Staff, like Mr. Harrison, looked through her. They saw the uniform, not the person inside it. They saw her as simple, uncomplicated, a background element in their own important lives. Each condescending glance, each dismissive wave of a hand, was a small paper cut to her soul. She would come home at night, the smell of industrial cleaning chemicals clinging to her clothes, and open her books. It was in those quiet hours, tracing the elegant lines of a foreign script, that she remembered who she was. She wasn't just a maid. She was a linguist, a scholar, a bridge between worlds. And it was a secret she kept locked away, hidden beneath a polite, deferential smile and a crisp, white apron. Her expertise was not merely academic, it was lived, breathed, and etched into her memory. The pinnacle of her university career had been a year-long immersion program in Kyoto, a city of ancient temples and modern commerce. That year had reshaped her. She hadn't just studied the language, she had absorbed it through her skin, learning its rhythms in the crowded markets, its subtleties in the hushed tea rooms, and its complexities in the boardroom of her host family's small textile company. Her host father, Mr. Sato, had been skeptical at first of the young American student, but he soon discovered that Lena possessed a rare and profound respect for their culture. She listened more than she spoke, observing the intricate rituals of business meetings, the careful dance of negotiation that was as much about relationship building as it was about profit. One afternoon, a crucial deal with a European buyer was on the verge of collapse due to a series of cultural misunderstandings. The professional translator, a technically proficient but culturally clumsy man, was only making things worse, turning nuanced suggestions into blunt demands. Lena, who had been quietly serving tea, watched the growing frustration on both sides. With a deep breath, She had interjected, respectfully rephrasing the buyer's concerns in a way that aligned with Japanese business etiquette, and then translating Mr. Sato's response not just literally, but with the full weight of its intended assurance and respect. The tension in the room had vanished, replaced by understanding. The deal was saved. Mr. Sato had looked at her that day with a new light in his eyes, a deep and abiding respect. "You have a Japanese heart," he had told her later, the highest compliment he could bestow. That memory was a source of quiet strength, a stark contrast to her current reality at the Grand Majestic. Here, her intelligence was an inconvenience, her potential unseen. She was valued only for her ability to remain silent and invisible. The contrast was a constant, dull ache. In Kyoto, she had been a respected collaborator, a cultural bridge. In this gleaming penthouse, she was furniture that was expected to remove itself. The irony was corrosive. The very skills that Mr. Harrison so desperately needed were standing 10 feet away from him, wrapped in the cheap gray fabric of a maid's uniform he so readily despised. He was drowning, shouting for a lifeguard, while standing on a shore he was too blind to see. Back in the penthouse, the air was thick with the stench of imminent collapse. Mr. Tanaka, a man whose time was measured in millions of dollars per minute, slowly and deliberately glanced at his platinum watch. The gesture was subtle, but it landed like a guillotine. His assistant, taking the cue, clicked his briefcase shut. The sound echoed in the cavernous suite, a final, metallic punctuation mark on a failed negotiation. They were preparing to leave. Mr. Harrison, his face now a mottled canvas of red and white, was on his phone, his voice a frantic, undignified bark. "Get me anyone," he hissed into the receiver. "I don't care who it is. A student, a tourist. Find someone who speaks the language." He was pacing like a caged animal, his bespoke suit rumpled, his carefully cultivated aura of authority completely gone. He looked like a man who had lost control not just of the meeting, but of himself. He tried one last, desperate gambit, turning to Mr. Tanaka's assistant and speaking as if to a child. "Tell him," he pleaded, his voice thin and reedy, "we will give him anything he wants. The presidential suite for life. A helicopter at his disposal." The assistant simply stared back, his expression a perfect, unnerving blank. Mr. Tanaka rose from his chair. The movement was fluid, graceful, and utterly final. He gave a short, almost imperceptible nod to his assistant. The deal was dead. The opportunity, the legacy, the future of the Grand Majestic as a global powerhouse. All of it was walking out the door. The junior executive, David, looked as though he might faint. The butler seemed to have shrunk into the wallpaper. The collective failure was a physical presence in the room, a ghost of what might have been. It was in this moment, the absolute nadir of Mr. Harrison's professional life, that the silence was most profound. It was a silence filled with the weight of arrogance, the cost of assumption, and the deafening sound of a door closing on a world of possibility. Mr. Harrison stood frozen, watching his career evaporate before his very eyes, a spectacular monument to his own spectacular blindness. The entire scene was a portrait of powerlessness, of a man undone by a single, unforeseen variable he had been too proud to prepare for. And the solution to his entire crisis was still standing by the door, watching him. Lena stood on the threshold, caught between two worlds. In front of her was the implosion of Mr. Harrison's career, a disaster of his own making. Behind her was the hallway, a path back to anonymity, back to the silent, invisible life she was paid to lead. Every instinct screamed at her to take that path, to walk away, to let the arrogant man who had dismissed her so callously reap the consequences of his own ignorance. It would be a quiet, personal justice. Years of being overlooked, of biting her tongue, of swallowing her pride, had conditioned her for this exact moment, to retreat, to disappear, to not make waves. To step forward would be to break every unwritten rule of her position. She was the maid. She was there to clean, not to speak. To intervene would be an act of profound insubordination. She could be fired on the spot. Worse, she could be publicly humiliated, her attempts ridiculed by a man desperate to salvage his own ego. She pictured his sneering face. "And what do you think you're doing? You think you can handle this?" The potential for shame was immense. But as Mr. Tanaka turned toward the door, something shifted inside her. It was the memory of Professor Albright's encouraging words, the echo of Mr. Sato's profound respect. It was the quiet, persistent voice that whispered, "This is who you are. This is what you can do." To remain silent now felt like more than just obedience. It felt like a betrayal of her own potential, a surrender to the small, cramped box the world had tried to put her in. It was one thing to be unseen by others, but it was another to make herself unseen to herself. The weight of her student loans pressed on her, a practical anchor in a sea of emotional turmoil. But this was about more than money. It was about dignity. It was about the validation of a skill she had poured her heart and soul into mastering. The conflict raged within her, a silent, lightning-fast war between fear and conviction. Her heart pounded against her ribs. One step back, and she was safe in her invisibility. One step forward, and everything could change, for better or for worse. Mr. Tanaka's hand reached for the doorknob. The moment was now or never. The click of the door latch beginning to turn was the sound that broke the spell. It was the final, irrevocable signal of departure. In that fractional second, Lena made her choice. She took a single, deliberate step forward, moving from the shadows of the entryway into the unforgiving light of the suite. Her worn, rubber-soled shoes made no sound on the plush carpet, but her movement commanded the attention of the room. Mr. Harrison, startled from his stupor, turned to face her, his expression a mask of pure fury. He opened his mouth to unleash a torrent of rage, to finally eject this lingering, disobedient employee from his sight. "I told you to," he began, his voice a low growl. But the words died in his throat. Before he could finish his sentence, Lena glided past him. She stopped a respectful distance from Mr. Tanaka, her posture straight, her shoulders back. She lowered her head and executed a perfect, formal bow, her movements precise and imbued with a deep, innate understanding of the custom. The angle was correct, the duration exact. It was an act of deference that was simultaneously an act of immense, unshakable confidence. Then she spoke. The voice that emerged was not the timid, hesitant whisper of a maid. It was clear, resonant, and utterly fluent. She addressed Mr. Tanaka in flawless, honorific Japanese, the formal Kigo dialect used in high-level business and diplomacy. Her words were a tapestry of respect and intricate grammar, a stark, shocking contrast to the gray uniform she wore. "Forgive my sudden interruption, sir," she said, her tone perfectly modulated. But a misunderstanding of this magnitude would be a great tragedy for two such esteemed enterprises. The room fell into a state of suspended animation. Time itself seemed to stop. Mr. Harrison froze mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open in a caricature of disbelief. David's eyes widened to the size of dinner plates. The butler, for the first time all day, showed an emotion, pure, unadulterated shock. Mr. Tanaka, who had been a statue of polite indifference, slowly turned his head. His impassive facade cracked, replaced by a flicker of genuine astonishment. He looked down at the young woman in the maid's uniform, and for the very first time since he had entered the room, he truly saw her. The silence that followed Lena's words was different. The oppressive tension of failure had been shattered, replaced by a new, vibrating frequency of pure shock. Mr. Tanaka straightened up, his hand falling away from the doorknob. He studied Lena for a long moment, his sharp, intelligent eyes taking in the humble uniform and the profound confidence in her gaze. Then he replied. His Japanese was rapid, layered with cultural and historical nuance, a complex question wrapped in a polite inquiry. He was testing her, probing the depth of her unexpected skill. Without a moment's hesitation, Lena listened, her head tilted slightly, absorbing every syllable. When he finished, she turned to the dumbfounded Mr. Harrison. Mr. Tanaka was not making a final demand, sir. She translated, her English voice calm and professional. He was referencing a classic parable about a swordsmith who refused to sell his finest blade to a wealthy lord he did not trust. He was explaining that for him, a partnership is not about the price, but about the character and reliability of the partner. He felt that an organization that could not manage a simple meeting was unlikely to be a reliable partner in a complex global venture. Harrison's face, which had been a mask of rage, was now slack with utter bewilderment. He stared at Lena as if she had just sprouted wings. The simplicity and depth of her translation laid his own frantic, materialistic pleading bare, exposing it as foolish and insulting. A rapid-fire conversation then erupted between Lena and Mr. Tanaka. It was a dazzling display of linguistic and cultural fluency. Lena moved effortlessly between languages, not just translating words, but conveying intent, emotion, and subtext. She explained the unforeseen traffic situation not as an excuse, but as an unfortunate circumstance that did not reflect the hotel's operational integrity. She spoke of the hotel's commitment to excellence with a sincerity that Harrison's blustering had completely lacked. She was no longer just a translator. She was a diplomat, single-handedly rebuilding the bridge that Mr. Harrison had so thoroughly burned. The power in the room had found a new center of gravity, and it was the young woman in the gray uniform. The rest of them, the manager, the executive, the butler, were now merely spectators, watching in stunned silence as the maid they had considered invisible saved them all. The tectonic plates of power in the penthouse suite had shifted with breathtaking speed. Mr. Harrison, who moments ago had been the undisputed authority, was now a ghost at his own meeting. He stood awkwardly to the side, his hands clasped in front of him, a superfluous figure watching his fate being decided by an employee he didn't even know the name of. Mr. Tanaka now directed all of his attention, his questions, and his consideration to Lena. He spoke to her not as a maid, but as a peer. He inquired about her background, his curiosity piqued. "How is it that you came to understand my language so completely?" he asked in Japanese, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. Lena answered with humble honesty, briefly mentioning her university studies and her time in Kyoto. Each answer she gave seemed to impress him further. Harrison, seeing his authority slipping away entirely, tried to reinsert himself into the conversation. He stepped forward, clearing his throat officiously. "Yes, well, thank you, miss," he began, fumbling for her name and failing. "Now, if you would please just tell him that we are prepared to offer a 10% reduction on the initial." Mr. Tanaka did not even turn his head. He simply raised a hand, a quiet, simple gesture that carried the weight of absolute command. Harrison's words caught in his throat. He was silenced, dismissed as easily as he himself had dismissed Lena just minutes earlier. The humiliation was total and public. The junior executive, David, watched the exchange with a mixture of terror and awe. The power reversal was complete. Mr. Tanaka then spoke a final, decisive sentence to Lena. She listened, nodded, and then turned to face Mr. Harrison. Her expression was neutral, her voice even. She had become the sole conduit of information, the gatekeeper to the future of the hotel. "Mr. Tanaka says he finds this development intriguing," she announced, the formal words landing like hammer blows. "He is willing to postpone his departure and reconsider the partnership." A wave of relief washed over Harrison's face, but it was premature. Lena wasn't finished. "However," she continued, her gaze steady, "he has one non-negotiable condition. He will only continue these negotiations if I, Lena, remain as the sole communicator and official liaison for all future proceedings." The blood drained from Mr. Harrison's face. He was being forced to cede control of the most important deal of his life to the maid he had tried to throw out of the room. The aftermath of the revelation was a quiet storm. The deal, once dead, was now back on the table, resurrected by the most unlikely of saviors. But the victory felt like a defeat for Mr. Harrison. He was forced to watch, in silent, agonizing humiliation, as Lena expertly guided the remainder of the meeting. She scheduled the next round of talks, confirmed dining arrangements, and conversed easily with Mr. Tanaka and his assistant, all with a poise and professionalism that he, in his panic, had utterly failed to muster. When Mr. Tanaka finally departed, he bowed to Lena first, a gesture of profound respect that sealed the new hierarchy in place. The moment the suite doors closed, Harrison's carefully constructed world came crashing down. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He simply sank into a plush armchair, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. He looked at Lena, truly looked at her, and in his eyes was a toxic cocktail of disbelief, resentment, and a grudging, terrifying flicker of respect. The following morning, a formal request arrived from Mr. Tanaka's corporation. It was an official offer of employment for Lena, not as a maid, but as a permanent executive liaison between his company and the hotel group. The proposed salary was more than triple what Mr. Harrison earned, and it came with a corporate apartment, a generous expense account, and a title that commanded immediate authority. The offer was conditional on the hotel's approval, a final, ironic twist of the knife. It was Mr. Harrison who had to sign the paperwork, officially promoting the woman he had scorned to a position of power far exceeding his own. He signed it, his hand moving stiffly across the page, each letter a testament to his own blindness. Lena accepted the position with the same quiet dignity she had displayed all along. There was no gloating, no "I told you so." Her victory was in the act itself, not in the humiliation of her former superior. On her last day in the gray uniform, as she packed her few belongings from the staff locker room, she paused. The uniform was a symbol of her invisibility, but it was also a reminder. It was a reminder that value is not determined by a title, a suit, or a position. It lies dormant in the most unexpected places, hidden behind assumptions and prejudice, waiting for a single moment of courage to bring it into the light. The Grand Majestic Hotel had learned a valuable, expensive lesson. And for Mr. Harrison, the sight of Lena, now dressed in a sharp business suit, confidently striding through the lobby to meet Mr. Tanaka's team, would be a permanent, searing reminder of the day the maid he had tried to erase ended up saving his entire world.